remember the moment I discovered the final version of my parents' will. I sat in my lawyer's office in downtown Chicago 5 days before Thanksgiving, shaking with a mixture of relief and rage. Relief that I finally held the truth in my hands, and rage because they had deliberately cut me out of every family gathering and celebration for the last 3 years. When I read the last clause, I felt a chill crawling up my spine. Equal distribution to all children, excluding Elizabeth Murray Donnelly. In that instant I decided I would mirror their cruelty. I had spent countless holidays pretending to be fine, smiling at Aunt Karen's sloppy mashed potatoes, enduring my siblings' thinly veiled glares. I swallowed my pride every Christmas, every Easter brunch, until I realized pride had no place in a family that wanted me invisible. As the youngest of 3 children, I always felt I had to earn my place. My brother, James, and sister, Rachel, seemed to glide effortlessly into parental favor. Our childhood home on Lakeshore Drive felt like mine only when my father was away on business. Otherwise, it felt like I was an extra shadow, echoing steps I thought belonged to someone else. When my mother called me to say she thought it would be best if I stayed home from my sister's wedding in Austin last spring, I felt my heart twist. She blamed my recent divorce, my supposed instability, but the truth was more insidious. I tried to ignore the hurt, telling myself that family would come around once I proved I had moved on. Instead, at every reunion, I watched them exchange glances when I entered the room. My sister's husband, Tom, always steered conversations away from me, often using a too loud cough as a signal. My brother's children barely acknowledged my presence, running off the moment I sat in the living room in Evanston. I remember the sharp sting in my chest when my nephew, like an echo of my own childhood, turned and darted away without a goodbye. I hated feeling like a ghost in my own family. The final blow came at last year's July barbecue in my parents' backyard in Naperville. My father raised a toast to my siblings and their spouses, praising their stability and accomplishments. He offered me a smile so thin it vanished before his words reached me. My mother lifted her wine glass and looked straight at James and Rachel while saying, "We're blessed to have such steadfast children." The heat pressed against my cheeks as I forced a clap, feeling the invitation to leave unspoken yet palpable. Later that evening, when they handed me the check for my hotel room, I knew that I no longer belonged. Sitting in my cramped apartment near Wrigley Field, I weighed my options. Therapy hadn't given me closure, and my own small business in Lincoln Park wouldn't survive if I indulged in pity. I wanted vindication, not tears. I reached out to a friend who worked at a boutique trust firm. Over coffee at a Greasy Spoon on Belmont Avenue, she listened to my story and asked a single question. "What do you want out of this?" I knew the answer before the steam from my mug faded. I wanted justice and a share of what I'd been promised. And I wanted them to know I wasn't invisible. In the weeks that followed, I reviewed every legal document I had. Lease agreements, tax returns, prior wills. My friend's firm drafted a revised trust amendment that mirrored every exclusion clause they had used against me. I inserted provisions ensuring any future request for my presence required written apology and restitution. I watched their hesitation when I sent the draft. First shock, then anger. Emails from my mother accusing me of betrayal flooded my inbox. My brother called me once, voice crackling as he threatened to cut me out forever. I felt a surge of satisfaction, reading each word. Then came the night I executed the plan. I waited until they were gathered at a rented villa in Santa Barbara for my niece's college graduation celebration. The ocean breeze shouldn't have felt so ominous, but as I slipped the final amendment into the envelope addressed to my father, I felt a thrill. No staged family dinner, no forced smiles, just a delivery that would append everything. I watched from the shadows as he opened the single page and read it aloud to the room. Silence stretched until my mother gasped. In that pregnant moment, I understood the power of absence. I never sought reconciliation afterward. Their pleas for mercy felt hollow. They begged me to attend Christmas dinner, to restore what I had taken. But I stood firm. I sent a single reply. "You made me invisible. Now you will learn what it means." The villa remained empty for the rest of the weekend, with unattended plates and forgotten toasts. As I boarded my flight back to Chicago, I stared out at the Pacific and realized this was not just a legal victory. It was a reclamation of my identity. A declaration that I belonged here on my own terms. That night I sent myself to sleep with my head held high, knowing they would whisper about me in every empty room. For the first time I felt truly seen and unafraid. The fallout from sending that amendment to my parents rippled through the early winter months like an unforgiving wind. When December turned to January, I woke each morning to a quiet apartment that felt both liberating and eerie. No more calls from my mother asking how I'd be at Christmas. No more awkward smiles from my siblings when they were forced to speak to me online. Instead, the silence spoke volumes. In that silence I discovered a raw honesty. I had chosen myself over their pretenses, and that choice came with unexpected consequences. It was not merely a legal maneuver I had executed, it was my declaration of independence. The first weeks of the year, I poured every ounce of energy into my design studio in Lincoln Park. I painted walls, redecorated the client lounge, and reorganized files that had collected dust. Each improvement felt symbolic, as though I was constructing a new foundation for my life. The emails of congratulation on my recent court success were interspersed with notes from potential clients intrigued by my tenacity. My business began to flourish under the weight of my newfound confidence, and I took on projects I had once deemed too ambitious. Yet even as I celebrated these victories, a quiet ache lingered, a question of whether triumph without reconciliation was truly worth the price. It wasn't long before I received the first notice, a lawsuit filed by my brother James, challenging the validity of the amendment on grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity. The papers arrived by certified mail, the envelope thick and foreboding. My heart pounded as I read the accusations, claims that I coerced my father, manipulated his intentions, and fractured the family irreparably. I sat at my kitchen table, law documents spread around me like storm-tossed leaves. The magnitude of what I had set in motion hit me then. This was no longer a personal vindication but a full-fledged legal war, one that threatened to consume me if I let it. I hired a seasoned attorney recommended by my friend at the trust firm, a woman named Simone who had the reputation of a bulldog in the courtroom. She reviewed every email, every draft, and every meeting note I had. When she looked up from the pile of documents and said, "You built your case impeccably," I felt my chest unclench. Yet she also warned me of the emotional toll ahead. Their family, she said. These battles leave scars that never fully heal. I nodded, understanding the stakes. It was about more than money or property. It was about respect and acknowledgement. And I was determined not to back down. As the lawsuit progressed, I found myself flipping through old photo albums I hadn't touched in years. I saw snapshots of summer barbecues on Lakeshore Drive, birthday cakes for James's 8th birthday, and Christmas mornings curled around the tree with Rachel. In those images I looked happy and carefree, belonging in a way I had since forgotten. Tears blurred the corners of those smiling faces, and for a moment I felt a surge of compassion for the people who had shut me out. Yet I also recognized that compassion did not require forfeiting my sense of self. Their inability to accept me on equal terms was a reflection of their own insecurities, not mine. In late February, a surprising development arrived by courier, a letter from my grandmother, my father's mother, whom I had last seen a decade ago in a nursing home visit. In shaky handwriting, she confessed that she had always resented how my parents favored my siblings, claiming it reminded her of her own failures. She revealed that she had witnessed my mother burning family letters had written during college and that my uncle had cautioned her to stay silent to avoid family drama. In her letter, she pleaded with me to meet her in Milwaukee and hear the untold truths of our lineage. This revelation reframed everything. It introduced an ally I never expected and hinted at deeper undercurrents that had shaped our family for generations. With Simone's counsel, I booked a flight to Milwaukee. The morning I arrived, snow muffled the streets and the air tasted of old winters. My grandmother lived in a small assisted living apartment overlooking the river. When I entered, she sat in a worn armchair, her silver hair tied back in a bun, eyes bright with memories. We spoke for hours about my father's childhood, his jealousy of his own sister, and the series of decisions that led to my exclusion. Every story she told was a piece of a puzzle I had struggled to solve. By the time I left, I felt armed, not only with legal arguments but with the deeper understanding of why the family had fractured so profoundly. Back in Chicago, the deposition loomed just days away. I spent evenings preparing testimony lines in front of the mirror, rehearsing calm and conviction. When the day came, I entered the sterile conference room with Simone by my side. My parents sat across the table, guarded and pale. As my father was questioned about his mental state when signing the amendment, I watched his hands tremble. He insisted he remembered everything clearly, but his voice wavered. My mother's eyes shifted between shame and defiance. In that moment, I felt the weight of all those holiday silences, of every time I had forced to laugh and watched them look away. And I realized I was no longer that frightened child seeking approval, just as the afternoon light through the blinds began to soften. Simone asked the most pivotal question, "Mr. Donnelly, did anyone influence your decision to amend the trust?" My father hesitated, swallowing before he said, "I believed I was doing the right thing by excluding Elizabeth. I thought she would be happier on her own." The words struck me like a blow and then dissolved into something unexpected: pity. I recognized that despite his actions, my father had tried to justify his cruelty as kindness. As the session ended, I gathered my things and walked out into the corridor, my heart pounding but clear. I had entered seeking validation. I left with an understanding that would define me beyond any court verdict. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single photograph of my grandmother and me on her porch in Milwaukee, smiling at each other. On the back she had scribbled, "They may not see you yet, but I do." I held that photo to my chest and understood that part two of this journey was closing with a truth more profound than any legal triumph. I had discovered allies in unexpected places, unearthed buried memories, and faced my family across a table built on years of silence. The final battle still lay ahead, but I was no longer invisible and I was never going back. The morning the judge delivered her verdict felt surreal. I sat beside Simone in the crowded courtroom, my palms slick on the creased dossier of exhibits and testimonies I'd carried in from Chicago. My family, my parents, my brother James, and my sister Rachel stood behind their counsel, faces tense with expectation. When the judge announced that the amendment excluding me from the inheritance was valid and enforceable, I felt a rush of relief so powerful it buckled my knees. Simone squeezed my shoulder, her whisper of congratulations drowned out by a whirlwind of memories. Every holiday I had been uninvited, every forced apology I had swallowed. In that moment, the final barrier between me and my rightful place dissolved, but instead of jubilation, I felt a quiet stillness settle over me, as though I had reached the summit of a mountain and discovered a plateau rather than a vista. After the ruling, as the courtroom emptied, my father approached me with a stiff nod. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his voice trembled when he said he was sorry for all the pain he had caused. He said he had acted out of fear and old prejudices, not malice, and that he regretted every silent dinner and displaced smile. I listened, truly listened for the first time in years. Forgiveness hovered on my lips, but I hesitated. This confrontation had been necessary to reclaim what was mine, yet reconciliation felt like a fragile bridge spanning too wide a chasm. My mother hovered behind him, her gaze darting between my father and me as though seeking permission to speak. She opened her mouth and then closed it. No words emerged. In that pregnant silence, I realized that acknowledgement and apology were not guarantees of trust restored. Walking through the courthouse lobby, I sensed the weight of onlookers' stares, some sympathetic, others curious about the woman who had dared to confront her entire family. The wind whipped outside, brisk and invigorating, and I swallowed the adrenaline that still pulsed in my veins. I owed James and Rachel no hatred, but I refused to let their past exclusions dictate my future. I extended an olive branch, an invitation to dinner at my apartment the following weekend. I drafted the email on my phone while Simone handled the paperwork, framing it simply: no recriminations, no demands, just a desire to see them on new terms. My hand hovered over the send button as memories of their previous rejections flooded back. Finally, I tapped send, my chest tightening with anticipation and fear of another rebuff. Over the next few days, business at my Lincoln Park studio blossomed. My clients seemed energized by my courtroom victory, and word of mouth spread. I stayed late most nights, putting finishing touches on design proposals and responding to inquiries with a professional fervor that left me exhausted yet invigorated. The apartment felt like a sanctuary, brightened by fresh flowers and reorganized shelves. Yet beneath the surface, a knot of tension coiled in my gut as I awaited my siblings' response. I found myself rehearsing polite greetings and neutral topics, determined not to let past grievances color our interaction. My therapist's words echoed in my mind. Restoration often requires setting boundaries as firmly as asserting rights. I resolved to maintain that balance. When Friday evening arrived, I set the table with simple elegance: white plates, silverware aligned, low candles flickering in crystal holders. I prepared my mother's favorite roast chicken recipe and steamed asparagus tossed in lemon zest, a dish familiar enough to soften old wounds. I practiced small talk, deciding to ask about their lives rather than dwell on mine. My heart pounded when I heard a knock at the door. James entered first, awkward in a charcoal blazer and jeans, followed by Rachel, whose expression was unreadable but guarded. They embraced me hesitantly. I returned the gesture with a steady warmth, hoping to convey both distance and openness, the paradox I needed them to understand. Dinner unfolded in careful steps. We toasted with Chardonnay, and James asked about my business. I spoke confidently but without triumphalism. Rachel shared news of her promotion, and I offered sincere congratulations. Conversation skirted around the inheritance, and when it did surface, I deflected with a light-hearted comment about my new car paid for entirely out of pocket. After dessert, I broached the subject directly. I know we all brought wounds to this table. I want to move forward, but I need clarity on what you need from me. My father's apology from days earlier echoed in my mind, and I watched his wife's face soften. James exhaled, admitting that seeing me stand up for myself forced him to reconsider his own assumptions. Rachel nodded, tears brimming as she said she had been ashamed of how they treated me. In that moment, I realized that opening this door required both courage and vulnerability. The next morning, I awoke to a text from my mother. "Thank you for last night. I hope we can continue." A tremor of joy ran through me, followed by a whisper of caution. Relationships that survive trauma require constant tending. Yet for the first time in a decade, I allowed myself to believe we might find new footing. I packed my laptop and headed to the studio, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Winning the inheritance was only the first victory. The greater triumph lay in asserting my worth and inviting those who had wounded me to witness it. In the weeks that followed, our family gatherings took on a tentative warmth. We met for birthdays and anniversaries, each event marked by an undercurrent of acknowledgement rather than avoidance. My siblings learned to include me in photos and conversations without prompting. My parents apologized when they realized they had slipped back into old patterns. I observed these shifts with a measured hope, reminding myself that change often arrives in increments. I continued my therapy and kept up with my business growth, recognizing that my newfound confidence extended beyond the courtroom. The weight of past exclusions lightened with each genuine exchange. Now, as I reflect on the final chapter of this saga, I understand that inheritance is more than a financial transfer. It is the legacy of how we choose to value one another. I reclaimed my share of our family's estate, but I also reclaimed my voice and my place at the table. The scars of our past remain, faint lines on a surface now smoothed by understanding and choice. I look forward with cautious optimism, knowing that belonging is not granted by bloodline alone but earned through respect, honesty, and the willingness to confront truths, however painful. This is the end of the third part of my story, but it is only the beginning of my life lived on my own terms.